All right. Well, thanks everyone for making time this hectic Monday after break. And this meeting, what my plan is, we have an hour scheduled. I'm hoping my presentation will take about 25 minutes or so, but if you have questions as I am going, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat, or just speak up. Any of that is fine. Sometimes it's easy to forget things that we went over earlier. I'm just happy to get the feedback. And this is about Glen Island, New York. So without further ado, I will go to deeper into this. Okay, so I do have to make a disclaimer in that we're looking at a marsh conservation project that was funded by EPA and also through NEIWPCC in partnership with Long Island SoundStudy, but it doesn't, any contents of this document or this presentation doesn't reflect the views. Also, I do want to note that we've had a lot of help from Westchester County and Westchester County Parks in terms of giving us very useful information and feedback, but it's not an official Westchester County or Westchester County Parks presentation either. So some of you are on on our stakeholder group, and so you know who I am, but I'm Jonathan Clow, an environmental consultant out of central Vermont, where I was just mentioning we had about 8 inches of snow last night. My kids are home on a snow day. I think they're old enough that you won't hear them running around and screaming, but I can't guarantee anything. And yes, I've been an environmental consultant, mostly for EPA clients since the mid-1990s. Another person who I need to mention who is not here because she's left her job at NEIWPCC and at NYSDEC is Vicki O'Neill. She really was the person who I think had the vision for this project and is also the LISS Habitat Restoration and Stewardship Coordinator. She's now with Audubon, New York. And Sarah is here as well. Thanks. Sarah gave a tremendous amount of help in this project. And you have a long title, LISS Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional. So the simple project purpose is to provide information to stakeholder group list and provide information to municipalities and conservation groups to develop these marsh conservation plans. And this meeting here is to present a marsh conservation plan, what we've discussed in that plan, and what so that we can get some feedback on it. This whole purpose is to try to improve coastal resilience, and it's just an example of the inside of the report. Hopefully you've all had a chance to see the report. If not, there will be a link in this presentation. We will email it to you. You can email it to us. You can email us your comments, or you can email us a request for the report. So please do get that. But the history of the report goes a little bit further back. Back in 2014, NYSDEC funded sea level rise modeling on the entirety of coastal New York State to look specifically at the effect of marshes. So which marshes would be predicted to be vulnerable, which marshes would be predicted to persist, where marshes might migrate onto adjacent dry land. So what is going to happen, because it's a major stressor for the marshes, the sea level rise. And I've been involved in a model that looks just at that, specifically at that, called SLAM. It also takes into account different sea level rise scenarios and uncertainties and things like how much sediment is going to be accumulated, and even the uncertainty of the sea level rise scenarios. And Vicki, that was updated. Vicki helped fund a project in 2015, which extended that to Westchester County. And then in 2017, it was updated again with new data. And we also included adaptation strategies and what those might look like, and an ecosystem services analysis tool, and also looked at the impact of combined sea level rise and storm surge on roads and infrastructure in coastal New York. And those data were all publicly available, just kind of on our website, but they really required someone with a moderate level of GIS expertise to look at them and understand them and think about them. And so part of what Vicky wanted to fund with this project, or LISS wanted to fund with this project, was to get those data out into the public's hands in an easier way. And so this viewer here, warrenpinnacle.com/LI maps, it is case sensitive. This is a lightweight viewer, loads very quickly and provides the vast majority of these data, but also adds tax parcel information, so you can look at specific tax parcels, which might be important in terms of the basis of decision making. So it's an attempt at a conservation tool, taking these data, which are just sitting on a server, require JS expertise. It's an attempt to create that tool. And so we have 66. She also noted that people tend to make decisions based on name marshes, like what's going to happen at this marsh or that marsh. So there's 66 locations where there's marsh or significant potential future marsh habitat were identified, and Glen Island was one of those. And there's fact sheets for each of those 66 sites as well, talking about their relative vulnerability and the like. And then this is the fifth marsh conservation plan that we've put together through 2 rounds of this project. And the thought here is to work with some of the towns that have so much power in terms of what their coastline looks like, other marsh conservation stakeholder groups, and see if we can develop consensus in terms of what tools might be useful to use under the stresses that these marshes face, to look at other stressors that are faced by the marshes. And I think the concept is that if you get a really interdisciplinary, interagency group together, that makes the process of seeking funding more straightforward. You have more consensus from local groups. Then these community workshops, which is what we're kind of looking at here, to roll out the conservation plan, and also sort of present what we found and also solicit feedback. What are we missing? And that is happening this month. And we had some delays in this project, but contractually this has to end this calendar year. So as you'll see at the end, if you're going to make comments on this, we're going to ask you to do it fairly quickly, within a week or so, maybe a week and a half, I think. So it's not a very long report, so hopefully that won't be too much of a burden. And we did have a stakeholder group because I'm located in central Vermont. Also, nobody can be an expert in all communities in coastal New York. And so try to get some local boots on the ground knowledge. Again, I did want to emphasize, while we have a lot of people from the county assisting us, it's not a parks or county product that we're looking at. So the document itself is the URL. It's not the simplest URL. You can either screen capture this and type it in. We can email it to you. I think Sarah probably already did email a link to it. There's some other ways to get at it. What we did with our stakeholder group was that we had 3 meetings. They were about an hour and a half long each, discussing what should be in the report. First of all, then I received a lot of information from the stakeholders, sent me PDFs, references, documents that helped me understand it a little bit more, that I put together to put the bones on that framework. And then the third meeting, I presented the report itself and solicited comments just to make sure everybody was on the same page regarding it. And so the framework, the outline of the report starts with just a look at the environmental and recreational assets that are currently there, which are significant, and then looks at the threats to Glen Island, and then looks at the potential benefits from green infrastructure, ways to manage marsh, the fact that there could be potential benefits to there being additional marshes and adjacent habitat on this site, and then a look at sort of future planning and marsh conservation planning specifically. So kind of here's what we've got. Here are the threats. Here's some potential benefits of changing management in the future as we look forward, and then different methods of doing that. So Glen Island is so cool. It has such a long and really interesting period of. But there are a lot of significant landscape modifications, especially as you go back several centuries. In the late 1800s, it was a summer resort community that included an amusement park and was accessible by steamboats. And then it was sold to Westchester County in 1923, and it was opened as a park after that. But I think this is what my understanding is. This is a photograph that then there was some illustration on top of what it looked like back in the late 1880s when it was a resort. And one of the things to note here is that there is a lot of open water in between what was originally 4 islands. Here's another look at it historically. 1897 topo map from USGS. And it shows that in between these islands, and it's often referred to as 4 islands, but I don't know. There are footbridges here between the islands. There's shallow waters, and notably, there were also these little fingers sticking out of here that look like marshes. Just because if the reason that's notable is not because we think those areas have to become marshes again, but if there was some interest in adding green infrastructure, there potentially could be some funds available through marsh restoration, because there was historically marsh there, and marsh restoration by definition is restoring marsh which was previously there. And Vicky told me that that NYSDEC does commonly use these USGS topos to get a sense of historically where marsh was, often in terms of making these funding decisions. So, but it's changed quite a bit since then. And here's some, now we get into some aerial photography. This is from 1925. And so you're looking back at this picture here, you got these sort of 3 islands and another island separate. Going back forward again, these 3 islands have been filled, and there's quite a little, there's getting close to a single landmass there. And if we come to the current period, this is largely the same footprint here that we're looking at, going back to 1925 to the current footprint. Obviously, a lot of parking, a beautiful beach has been constructed. So there's a lot going on. Right, so currently it's a over 64 acre park. It's heavily used as a public beach, and heavily valued as a public beach. And I think one of the things is that in this report is that in no way, as we're thinking about the future, are we saying this shouldn't be a beach anymore, but maybe just how can this continue to be a beach and have enhanced beautiful green space around it. And there's also the Glen Island Harbor Club restaurant on the site. And so Westchester County Parks was very helpful as part of this. So I see they've got the chat is lighting up. I don't know. Oh, that good. Those are some links. Thank you very much, Sarah. Westchester County Parks was extremely helpful for their own purposes and for our purposes, looking at what currently exists there on the southern half of Glen Island Park in terms of environmental assets. A lot of charismatic birds present, including some that are threatened or endangered. The osprey was noted, which is a state species of special concern, and the common tern, which is state threatened. Eastern oyster was located, high priority species of greatest conservation need. So there are quite a lot of environmental assets already on site. Oh, wait. Computer froze up there for a moment. But the reason that we really looked at this site, unlike most of the other sites that we looked at, and it's interesting because this is a marsh conservation plan, is not because there is a lot of marshes currently. There may be some fringing marshes here and there, but for the most part, it's not a marsh, it's not a site with marshes on it. But when we looked at this modeling and we looked at it under sea level rise, as soon as 2040, so this is basically, we're looking at where land might have the habitat and the flooding frequency, because coastal marshes require a certain frequency of flooding. Where might marshes be able to persist, which also means dry land is at risk. And looking as near ahead as 2040, this is the red areas are the areas where are most likely to be flooded at least once per month, which is dangerous to dry land, potentially could support a high marsh habitat. And so even by 2040, there's already some large areas to the west of the study area. And these areas to the east, these percentages are really low. The blue colors. So it's saying probably will still be dry land by 2040. But there's a chance under worst case scenarios that this area also will be flooded. Unfortunately, the latest news with respect to the speed of sea level rise and melting glaciers hasn't been exactly promising. And so we also looked at basically marsh types under different sea level rise scenarios. So this map here is an uncertainty analysis. It includes all kinds of uncertainty in sea levels, uncertainty in marsh accretion rates, tide ranges, and the like. Now we start looking at what are called deterministic model results. We take a single model result and you look at what is predicted in terms of land cover, starting with what the National Wetland Inventory has in it. And we have this gray color, low tidal, low marsh is in green, high marsh is in blue. A low marsh being a marsh that's flooded pretty much daily, a high marsh that's flooded monthly. And then also looking at flooded developed dry land with the caveat that we really had a kind of a terrible line in terms of these data for what was developed and what wasn't really weren't high resolution. So you can see, for example, here, obviously, where the parking lot is not precisely demarcated in this by any means. And you'll see as we go forward, there's a sort of a strange checkerboard of results, which is not super important, but just some uncertainty in terms of where development is. So I think these are like 30-meter squares, whereas we're running the model on 5-meter resolution. So under this scenario, this is a moderate sea level rise scenario, about 0.9 meters by 2100, probably considered by a lot of researchers to be pretty close to what is most likely. And under this most likely scenario, as we said before, by 2040, we have some regular flooding 12 times a year, approximately monthly flooding on the western portion of the island. And by 2070, that regular flooding extends quite a bit further. And by 2100, we start having some daily flooding in some of these areas as well. So this was part of the reason why we looked at this area. There are a lot of low-lying areas in Westchester County, but this is one of the lowest, and probably because of the nature of how fill was brought in. Now, if you look under closer to a worst-case scenario, there's a lot more flooding in 2040. This is where those blue lines come in, less likely, but still possible. And then by 2100, you have the whole island is flooded daily. So that's one of the most significant threats to Glen Island in general. Another, I would say, more minor threat, but something to keep an eye on, are water quality issues. And one of the things that make it more of a minor issue is that in terms of beachgoers and bacteria levels, Glen Island persistently gets A+ scores from Save the Sound. So it is a great resource for beachgoers, and would like to keep it that way. In terms of the adjacent waters, being in the eastern portion of Long Island Sound, there are ongoing water quality issues. So this eastern Narrows gets a C grade, primarily because it goes anoxic, has low oxygen levels, has high dissolved organic matter, has high chlorophyll A, which means a lot of algae in the systems. And that's basically, as you go from west to east along Long Island, the water quality issues become more significant. And actually, New Rochelle Harbor, yeah, has a better grade. It doesn't have the DOM and the chlorophyll A problems as much. I guess it's just a little, has more, not exactly sure why, but there must be some fresh water flow that is helping to keep that cleaner. So basically, in terms of ecology, it would be ideal if these water quality didn't get any worse. But probably it's not a big issue in terms of considering future marsh habitat, I don't think. So then the question becomes, why are we talking about marshes at a site that doesn't currently have them? And the reason that is, in the future, some of the current shoreline hardening at Glen Island, if that could be replaced with something more like a living shoreline, which we'll talk about in a moment, is sort of like a combination between a seawall and a marsh, that you could have both human-centered and ecological benefits from them. And so we just spent a little bit of time in the report going through what are the benefits of marshes in general. One of the important ones is wave attenuation, in the fact that a lot of coastal erosion that occurs is because of wave action, and marshes reduce the height of marshes and the energy of marshes that hit the dry land adjacent. And also another big piece here is habitat. We talked about the fact that there are already ecological resources, but those would significantly be enhanced. We know that marshes really are engineers of habitat, and they produce a tremendous amount of food resources, refuge from predators, and attract charismatic species as well. And the other piece is that in terms of recreation, having there be an adjacent natural area often is a draw for people who are coming to canoe and kayak. Potentially, if the ecology works out and you have more fish habitat, you're going to have better fishing, and wildlife viewing occurs. So it there's a possibility that it can just be nice for humans. Not only because their shoreline's not eroding, but it's also a nice place to be in terms of the natural habitat around them. And it also provides benefits for water quality. As I was discussing, the water quality is not terrible there, but tidal marshes will sequester carbon dioxide, also nutrients. So to a certain extent, you can't have too many nutrients or it starts to harm the marshes. But to a certain extent, marshes improve water quality in the adjacent waters. All right, so we've kind of gone through this so far. We have this island. It's a tremendous resource to the public. We potentially have to do something looking forward, because the sea level rise scenarios for this site are a bit sobering. And so there's a number of things we can look at for additional flood protection. And what we came up with when we were thinking about this were sort of 4 categories. One is called living shorelines. One would be bringing additional fill in. I've graded these out because we're going to discuss these in future slides. We're not discarding them as possibilities by any means. Another would be vertical seawalls, just building up a hardened seawall, which has already somewhat occurred at this site. And then combined approaches where you have a little bit of each of that going on. And so what living shoreline is a natural material shoreline, including things like plants, sand, and rocks. So in this image here from NOAA, we have sort of a conventional seawall on one side and a living shoreline on the other, where you might have a feature like an adjacent oyster reef, which assists in accumulation of sediment and also assists in ecosystem services. And you have a marsh going up. And the other thing that to point out is that living shorelines, they're designed to grow over time, because as I was saying, in terms of the modeling we look at the fact that marshes tend to accumulate sediment as they get flooded regularly. inorganic and organic sediments accumulate, and so they actually grow in elevation. So there is a feedback between marshes and sea level rise to a certain extent. If sea level rise gets too great, then the marshes become drowned. But there is a potential sea level rise benefit there. And so right, there is also a nearby living shoreline in Stratford Point, Connecticut. And there's some papers showing that that living shoreline provided wave erosion control. The waves were 30 to 40% less powerful hitting the mainland next to the installation, and that after the installation of reef balls, there was additional soil accumulation in marshes that had been eroding away previously. So it can work. So some additional options for flood protection would be bringing in additional fill. And as we talked about before, Glen Island Park was constructed using fill in historically open water areas. So that's something that, wouldn't happen today, but it has provided a tremendous amount of benefits to people that were visiting it. And so I think the benefit here is that you could use techniques that were already used on the site to basically maintain the status quo potentially. The drawbacks would be it's going to be a lot more costly than it was previously, and there may be some permitting issues. Another possibility would do, when you're thinking about a living shoreline, if you are actually increasing a berm around the outside of that, you also have to consider the fact that the dry land needs to drain, because you don't want to basically build a bowl in which there's a lot of fresh water coming out of the sky, a lot of precipitation occurring, intense rates, and so you could have ponding and subsidence if that's not properly designed. But in terms of this, the permitting issue, there was just a bill in 2023, the Living Shorelines Bill, that states in terms of permitting that the state has to give preference to a permit application based on nature-based solution design, unless an alternative analysis that reviews nature-based solutions has been evaluated and the best available information shows such approaches are not suitable. So in terms of permitting for shoreline management, the state is very much pointing to, by law, pointing towards living shoreline. So at a minimum, this kind of option needs to be considered. The other thing that I've been seeing a lot about in terms of vertical seawalls is that, again, we have this question about the drainage. And there is a potential for sight lines. So if you need to build up, a meter without adding some fill in the middle, then it may be that people who are using that picnic area are kind of looking at a wall as opposed to looking at the ocean. So just some things to consider. And then obviously combined approaches. This is really neat nearby combined approach, which includes obviously some significant vertical walls with some gaps in it that provides tide pools and intertidal marsh habitat. And that will provide a combination of flood protection, habitat, as well as educational opportunities and recreation in a single installation. Now, this cost many millions of dollars. It may not be reasonable, but it just goes to show the kind of thing that how ecology and recreation could potentially go hand in hand, and there can be combined approaches. It's not we're saying vertical seawall is bad, marsh is good. There can be combinations there. The other thing that the report talks about are potential funding sources for green infrastructure. And there are a lot of them right now. When we were doing the report that we did in Stony Brook Harbor, some of the local mayors and reporters stated that this was really, they'd never seen so much money in the pipeline for green projects and for infrastructure projects in general. A lot of the money that the federal government and the state government is using has used and is using for COVID relief money to stimulate the economy has gone into this area. And so it's, this could be something that's beneficial, because if you do have to do something to the shoreline anyway, and I guess there's, that'll become clear over the next decade or so. But if you did have to do something to the shoreline anyway, it might help to get some of these federal and state funding sources, including things like the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. There are a number of federal grants and opportunities, and it's everything. It goes all the way back to grant writing assistance and planning engineering, all the way to funds for shovel-ready projects. So, and that pretty much is the way that the report has been structured, sort of a fairly straightforward evaluation of what's there, evaluation of its benefits, looking at how ecological services and human-centered benefits could be improved by green shorelines, and then looking at some of the possible options. And right, the link to the report is there. But because we need to take into account this comments prior to giving this to our client, and NEIWPCC needs a couple of weeks to review the document before they can. All that has to be done by this calendar year. Unfortunately, we really need comments received by December 6th. Now, if you email me on December 6th and you say I'm working on it and I need till the 7th or the 8th, that would be great to know, because I'm going to have 3 reports to revise, and I can probably work around that. But we definitely, if we hear from you after we've sent this off to NEIWPCC as a final document for their approval, that may not work out. And so you can either chat or provide feedback at this meeting. My email is here, and we will definitely consider and respond to your comments. And in most cases, looking at the past, we've edited the documents as a result of people's feedback. So it's been a very useful process. I'm hoping that we get some on this project.